Entering the discussion about bending, this is not going to be some blow your mind new set of concepts, but we are going to be chaining concepts together. This is a capstone course of technique and technical application. We understand in bonsai, you think about the function or the technique, and you think about the aesthetic or function and form, technique and aesthetic, okay? So when we start to apply this concept, everything that we chain together is going to merge the lines of technique and aesthetic through this conversation. Again, I'm not here to teach you something new, but we always piggyback on where we are in the time of year and the behavior of the species. We recognize, listen, at this point in time, for a majority of our pines and junipers, and there are exceptions. For example, ponderosa pine still elongating, Japanese black pine that hasn't been decandled still elongating. We want to be respectful of understanding when trees harden off and are in their energy positive state, but for the majority of pines and junipers, we are at a point where the sugar starch distribution, when we talk about that winter hardiness scale, we talk about peaking out here at winter in January, and we talk about when we fully run out, right? This is right around that sort of June, July, and in the Northern Hemisphere, the farther north you go, the farther into July it takes for that cell to cell. Tree is the perfect system. Over the spring season, we do spring growth, our production of foliar mass recuperates sugars and starches over the fall, vascular tissue plus independent cell, sugar starch loading, okay? And we recognize that that water moving into the system, once we start to get longer daylight length, takes that sugar and that starch from cell to cell. Of course, transpiration has to continue, so we see the big movement of water occurring as we get into the hotter portions of the year. The energy's been spent on new foliar mass. Energy is returning and adding back that system, small degree of spring growth. In terms of a growth ring, we have a small portion of vascular tissue in the spring. That has occurred or is occurring right now, the vascular payback. And suddenly we start to see, even after that vascular payback, an evening out of sugars and starches prior to the onset of fall growth, okay? And we're hitting that window, and we're using that window. Now, if you are experiencing summer dormancy, if you are in a high heat, high relative humidity environment anywhere in the world, we have to recognize that the summer dormant period of time is not an opportune or ideal time to be doing really aggressive bending, okay? But if we maintain vascular growth, if you are taking advantage of that late spring growth, or we are in an environment where we continue to add vascular growth and we don't experience a massive summer dormancy, we are in the season, specifically for junipers, but entering or considering the season for pines, to be doing this kind of heavy bending based on that sugar starch and that vascular productivity evening out and starting to settle down within the tree, okay? In that transition point, we try to hit big moves, big styling processes at the beginning of vascular productivity or prior to the onset of foliar growth. Number one in the spring, number two in the fall. That fall bleeds late summer into early fall as our opportune time. We're setting ourselves up with technique, okay? Now, the consequence of that is that now we have a cuticle formed on a majority of the growth. Now our trees become a little bit more, and this is where we've got to be careful with our balance of water and oxygen, a little bit more routine within which we can predict their watering needs. Temperatures start to even out, whether they even out hot, mild, or cooler, right? Temperatures even out, trees settle into a groove. You've got to pull yourself out of that groove. Periodically, in the watering process, you have got to change up your approach to the watering system, because if we are making mistakes and continuing to deliver, and we're keeping that tree too wet, this is the time of year where it suffers, where no growth is taking place, where that additional 15% or a minimal amount of growth, that additional 15% of water utilization, even in an area where we don't experience summer dormancy, the tree is not in a massive state of production and energy expenditure. Watering's got to be a high degree of observation to prevent and avoid creating issues of imbalance of water and oxygen right now. This is a crux time of the year, high temperature, and water behavior is shifting, okay? But we like this moderate water delivery. We like this calm period to do this kind of structural setting because now the cambium and the xylem have readhered. And recognizing that with the distribution of sugars and starches, the calming down of the abundant water that's being moved through the system because of that concentration gradient, it's a great time. So understanding and also recognizing we're going to do big bending, we're going to do styling right now, that will alter the tree's water requirements dramatically. Dramatically. Part of big bending, we talk about the lead up to it and when are we ready, when are we ready, when are we ready? What do you do afterwards? The success of big bending is the application of technique, the concept of aesthetic, and aftercare. And aftercare can compensate for extreme mishaps in big bending if we are on point in understanding that keeping the roots too wet in our desire to foster this tree's health after big bends is one of the worst things we can do. Very, very accurate watering post big bending and making sure that if the foliar mass needs to stay hydrated, misting, supplemental, we want to just stop transpiration. Okay, when we talk about foliar misting, no bigger time of the year than big bending in the late summer, early fall, where we have long daylight length and high temperatures. Here's our needle mass on our juniper. We have the stomata where gaseous exchange is occurring. Water is leaving. Okay, now, but in this bend, and I'm going to go ahead and obviously, I'm going to shorten the time frame or the visual span down to the base. So here's our tree here. Here's our bonsai container. With that break, we recognize the tension on the chain that's being put through that chain with the loss of that water via the stomata. That the tension that's being put on that chain when we decrease water transport might be too much. And if that foliar mass loses hydration, gets too hot, can't cool itself, can't keep perpetuating, sugar starch productivity, I don't have my water, I don't have my water, I don't have my water, that's when we see that piece fade, okay? And so what we're thinking is I'm going to stop with the application of misting on that foliar mass. The water is actually going to coat those stomata where that gaseous exchange is occurring with a layer or a film of water. Most people think misting hydrates the foliage. No, it does not. It stops the loss of water, also stops the creation of sugars and starches because carbon dioxide can't come in. We're saying, listen, it can't lose that heat energy, right? We know that's an application of misting. It can't take in carbon dioxide, but we do stop the loss of water. And so you have this tension here on this chain where this lack of transport to hydrate this mass is being impaired. We stop the loss of water, and that sort of really tense, tight rope kind of loosens, and the water catches up. And then that water evaporates off of the surface, water starts being lost again, and maybe it puts tension on that chain again, and maybe we missed it again, and we relieve that tension on that chain. The degree of the break dictates the degree that we would attempt to miss that foliar mass. I don't think you want to be misting any more than 2, max 3 times a day. Okay, we're not talking about misting every 5 minutes for 30 seconds. Nothing of that sort at this time of year will be fruitful for your tree, right? It will keep the tree too wet. There will be fungal issues as a result, even in dry regions. But more importantly, it'll keep your soil mass too wet. It'll keep your soil mass too wet, and root rot is exactly what happens when we do not respect the balance of water and oxygen right now. Okay? Moving it out of the shade, morning sun, afternoon shade, or maybe we even keep it out of morning sun. Until we see, and what's the tell-all? We start to see new growth. Now, does new growth mean that water distribution has been reestablished? Yes, in the condition that you have put that tree in. Heavy shade, avoiding wind, misting consistently. Don't think that we just stop and set it out in the sun now, right? We have to now acclimate that tree. Reduction in misting over a period of 7 to 10 days. From 3 to 2 to 1 to none, we continue to observe, right? Slight increase into wind and sun in the mornings, more intense if we've had it in morning light, a little bit longer in the day, and we maybe look at misting again as we transition in for that first few days. So we wean it in the shade off of misting, we move it into the sun, maybe we start misting once or twice a day, just being careful, not oversaturate the soil mass, observing, things keep moving, we continue to reduce the mist, we move it out in the middle of the fall to full sun. This is how we repair, okay? Big damage at this point in time, you're going to need to greenhouse it. You're going to need to greenhouse it. Okay, there are very few big breaks that are going to happen in the fall that you should ever roll the dice on by leaving it out in heavy winter conditions, especially if there's snow, right? But then beyond that, just the consideration of applying a tremendous amount of cold to a limited amount of vascular tissue. Water, as a physiological discussion of big bending, is one of the biggest ways that we fail or succeed in the aftercare or in our awareness of all of those different points.